Hello and good morning, everyone. So, welcome to Göteborg Film Festival, to Nordic Film Market, and to this morning's seminar that we present as a part of our Nostradamus project, aiming to shed some light on the future of the audiovisual industries. As many of you know, we do an annual report with the Nostradamus, written by the excellent Johanna, whom you will meet soon. And the 10th report will actually be released in May during Marché du Film in Cannes. But now, for this future-facing session, where we will meet industry game changers to spotlight sustainable talent development and embracing diverse voices as a mean to success. We are very happy to present this session in collaboration with Marché du Film and their impACT initiative. So, before welcoming Johanna on stage, I would like to say a big thank to our lead partner, Film Invest, and with the support also from Nordisk Film and TV Fund, the region of Västra Götaland, and Kulturakademin. I also want to add that after the session is finished, everybody needs to go to the entrance and have their badge rechecked, because for the next session we will have another. We will only let in some with some badges. Yeah, you know what I mean. You know what I mean. So please give a warm hand from Johanna Koljonen.
Thank you, Josef. Good morning. Oh my God, so many of you up this early. Gold star, no pressure. So today we're going to follow up a theme from last year's Nostradamus report, where one of the chapters delved into some very alarming studies of mental health and harassment and workplace safety in this industry. And if you haven't read that, I really recommend to go look at that. You can find it all on göteborgfilmfestival.se/Nostradamus. So this alarming state of exhaustion in the industry needs to change, obviously, and not just because of ethical reasons. It's also an absolute business necessity for all of us. Misery and exhaustion at work does not create great art, even though perhaps sometimes we have narratives that suggest they do. Misery and exhaustion creates people who make more mistakes, who are less innovative and fast in solving them, and who often end up leaving the industry just when we've trained them. And all of this is very expensive. All of this stuff connects to another challenge, which is the media usage behaviors, values, and the expectations of people 25 and under, Gen Z and whoever comes after that. In our industry, we tend to measure success always in terms of reach, how many tickets at the box office, how many views, how many subscribers. And we don't really tend to spend a lot of time reflecting on who is not watching. Who are the people that we didn't reach? And this, I think, is dangerous because we tend to assume that the patterns will remain similar over time. So from the position of a media analyst looking at the future, I think this is a mistake. We clearly want to engage young audiences with European content because those, for all kinds of other reasons as well, but also because those young viewers will be our middle-aged viewers before too long. Also, because the young viewers will become the young creators and the new talent. In fact, many of them, of course, already are young creators with a lot of talent, and they are not waiting for the film industry gatekeepers' permission to tell stories, to create works, to distribute them, or even to monetize them successfully. I think in this industry historically, we have had a structure where we've felt that people should be pretty grateful to get to work in the industry. And even perhaps an attitude that the audience should be pretty grateful to be allowed to watch our amazing products that we make. Whether it was completely precisely relevant for them or not, this stuff does not work anymore. Audiences will always choose content on relevance, which, among other things, requires our creators to represent the glorious diversity of the audience. And I would say that this would also require at least some of our storytellers to belong to these younger generations, to understand their daily life, to understand their values and concerns, and also to understand the visual grammar and the explosive creativity of the video media that young people are using to communicate with each other and express themselves literally every day. So historically working in film has been very attractive, but I don't think that this residual glamour of past glory days and like Hollywood fantasies is enough to attract young talent anymore. Not if you have to intern without a salary for years and years. A lot of people, most people in fact, can't afford to do that. Not if you have to endure bullying or racist microaggressions in the workplace. And certainly not if you have to work endless hours in a thankless job and still won't be allowed to tell the stories that are important to you. So this is the difficulty, and it's very gloomy, and I'm sorry to bring up all this darkness this early in the morning. Today we're going to try and attempt something quite difficult on this stage. We're going to try to imagine a tomorrow where these challenges have been solved, and to talk about how fun and satisfying and fruitful it is, or at least can be, to move forward on this path towards a diverse and healthy industry, because each of us needs to do something. Each of us has the power to do something. And perhaps especially important this is at our historical institutions. So to start us off, with a few minutes about how the European Film Academy is starting to tackle this work. Please welcome its Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Fatih Abay. I'm thinking maybe we sit down here even and talk to each other, but I will give you many uninterrupted minutes at the start. So go right ahead.
Good morning first. Thank you for having me. Yes, so I'm the Diversity Inclusion Officer of the European Film Academy. For those in the audience who are still not familiar with the European Film Academy, we are an institution founded in the late 80s by Ingmar Bergman, for example, and other directors, mostly male, in Europe and white. And this is now changing a bit, the European Film Academy in the last years. We have now a female president, Agnieszka Holland, is now the president of the Academy, and with the CEO, Matthijs Forte-Knoll, since 2 years. The Academy is now on a way on changing its brand and rebranding itself. So this is maybe very important that also topics like sustainability and diversity inclusion are now basically on a very big agenda right now. So what I did, I just started my position last summer. So the last half year was basically just observation. I mean, I'm myself coming from anthropology, I'm an anthropologist, academia, so nothing with film experience, film industry experience before. And I think this is expert knowledge our CEO wanted to have for his vision. And so what I will just do in the next couple of minutes is basically just to sum up maybe my observations, which I did, and in combination with this kind of topic here. Yeah. So I think what's very important in the last 6 months, what I observed is actually the very thrive and the need for data. I mean, there's a lot of need for data in the industry, and there are also collectives in Germany, but also in France or in Sweden, the institutes where they collect data on diversity, inclusion and sustainability, and especially when it comes to the talent. And there I think it's very important that here we have to know why we need that data. So what is the data about, but also for what we use this data. I mean, we can collect data, and there's also still I feel like in the industry there's still a bit the hesitance to collect data, because there's a lot of people in the last 6 months I talked to, they were very kind of nervous about, okay, what we should do with data. So I think data
This is because they're afraid of what they're going to find out.
It's more about like what we can ask, or how we can ask things, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion, because the race ethnicity question is right now a question which is very, very on the upfront, is also how we can ask this. And obviously me as a researcher, and I'm in contact with a lot of research institutes throughout Europe and in the UK, the BFI is also basically cooperating with researchers in this when it comes to their diversity inclusion standards. So there's actually a lot of kind of, yeah, I mean, in UK you don't have this kind of barriers of collecting data. So I think this barrier has to be broken in the industry. Second observation which I made is basically the accessibility to the industry, especially for talent. And here talent, I don't really see talent as only the young generation. Yesterday I attended the Talents to Watch program, and I was very, very impressed how this festival and also Sweden is kind of nurturing their talent, especially through this kind of pitches. Obviously on the big international film festivals like Berlin, you have also these pitches, but it's more on an international scope and not really as a national scope. And I think the domestic scope is also here very important to kind of nurture your own talent first. And I was very impressed how diverse and inclusive actually all these pitches were and had a very different voice. And this is, I think, what we have to also nurture more. But also here it's not about just the young generation. There are a lot of marginalized filmmakers in Europe, people or POC women, for example, in Germany or in France, where they basically still have not access to the industry. Yeah. And it's also like that they're not mostly like up to date when it comes to film funding. So they are always a bit late. So I think there should be a kind of more, also kind of onboarding for those more, where to get these kind of fundings or trainings in order to basically take those people also on board. So this is very important.
And I think you're right to say, some applause from the corner there, very nice, that a lot of women of color, for instance, might get into the industry, and then actually like the situation used to be for all, for instance, female directors, it would just become harder to get that second film and that third film, so you kind of are slipping behind. So it's a kind of pretend inclusiveness, like yes, you're in the industry, but if you don't actually get to operate on the same terms, you're not also really embraced.
Yes, and also because it's a reference system a lot. I mean, obviously the film funders, they actually would like work actually with familiar faces. So even if they are open to newness, they say, okay, it would be nice if this person comes with somebody I know. So there's always this kind of reference system which obviously hinders then new talents to kind of access or even basically continue in the industry successfully. So this is maybe here important. And then the third observation which I make, and it's very important to the topic diversity inclusion, I feel like obviously there's this conversations, and especially North American conversations, or US conversations on race and ethnicity, and they are obviously also very important. And but I think here we have to also put the diversity inclusion into local context, and especially in the European context. I mean, we as the European Film Academy, we represent Europe in a very broad vision. So we have a very broad understanding of Europe, so meaning we also represent countries which are not in the EU. And there, I think it's also important to kind of put these discussions into context and to see, for example, Eastern Europe is a very big example of it. How do we put then, how actually the industry there can still check the diversity box, because they have to know how to find their own diversity within, which is not only when they don't have a black population, that they actually look at the biggest minority groups in this when it comes to the race ethnicity question, but also obviously other diversities like people with health conditions and impairments, or age, or indigenous people. So I think it's
and
very
regions,
important.
sometimes I feel like rural populations, urban populations, this kind of thing as well.
Yes. So this is very important, that also we basically kind of put this in context, but also obviously have a kind of still common European voice with it. So I'm obviously in countries where the race ethnicity question is very, very visible, like Germany, France, UK. There I think there should be much more done for visibility on and behind screen. but still it's very important to put this always in context in each country.
Yeah, and also I think I realize as you're speaking that it's very different to talk I mean, it's not very different, but it is different to talk about race and ethnicity in countries with colonial histories, for instance, and countries with different kinds of migration patterns. Racism can operate very similarly, but the solutions and the structural issues might be quite different in the local
They are, and I think it's also about like finding its audience, right? So to see, okay, what are the new stories, interesting stories? I mean, one big example now in Germany is actually the latest movie of Fatih Akın, the German-Turkish director, Rheingold. I mean, it's maybe for those people who did not see it yet, it's an autobiographical story about a Kurdish German rapper who came then, so who did also some crime delicts and then basically landed in jail. And so he basically filmed his life, and then people went really to the cinema from these communities who love that music and who basically you would not see in the normal art house cinema. So basically it broke like the 1 million threshold of viewers in Germany, and it's a big success. And also the fact that he basically really kind of used the social media to campaign for his movie. And I think it's important to also basically address communities which are normally not very going to the cinema, that they at least find an audience. I mean, what we want to do with the European Film Academy also this year, we will launch the European Film Club, where we will basically have a platform for the European youth, age 11 to 19, in order to basically be able to watch European movies on the platform, but also to discuss about them. So, and this is, I think, also a big first step to have access or make people European film lovers, and then basically maybe decide to become part of that industry. And I think the last observation I want to do, and then we can have some questions, is that we also should not forget about the important discourses which are obviously impacting now our industry. Obviously also external factors, racism, sexism. So this is very important that these discourses we really still always have to address. And then also when you look on artificial intelligence, for example, which is a new topic, and also in diversity inclusion, it's a bit problematic, because if you look how consumer behavior, let's for example on the streamers, obviously you have a different pattern and a different algorithm. So the algorithm would basically feed you with certain movies based on your consumer behavior. And I think this is also important, what kind of movies you basically get due to your algorithm. And we at the European Film Academy also now founded the Department of European Film Heritage, and that's also very important to also discuss the question whose heritage we are talking about, because white German boy from the middle class has definitely a different heritage than Turkish German queer like me who grew up in Berlin, but still I grew up with completely different movies. And I think this is very important to kind of also see where this kind of heritage is basically leading you when it comes to cinema movie loving, to your passion as an audience, as a member. Yeah.
This is so fascinating. This question of film heritage, of these sort of catalogs or canons, separate canons, connects to the question of the AI. I guess, of course, yes, as you're saying, I think the AI has at least two different problems. One is that AIs are trained on big amounts of data where the majority population's preferences are going to be established as norms, or even literally how they look will be established as norms in generative AI images and so on. And then separately from that, the AI algorithms, the recommendation algorithms only want to show you things that you already have. And this is very, I mean, I'm a white person, so when I open my Netflix, the little images are always of white people, and then I notice with friends of color, like, wait a minute, like their menu images of the exact same picture even might be a person of color. So it's very sort of insidious and invisible ways that we're directed to not be exposed to things that are very different from ourselves. And that's alarming, I think.
Yes, and then also obviously it's about the quality of the stories. I mean, TV, I attended now the TV series drama the last 2 days, and the discussions we have in TV, and they're very much more advanced, I think, when it comes to diversity, inclusion itself, because of the formats, of the different audience development. And I think it's important that also the film industry learns from them, and for sure also TV can still learn from the film industry. But it's very important that we kind of also combine our knowledge. So there's a lot about knowledge sharing in Europe. I think film institutes, film industries, festivals should collaborate more in order to tackle these issues I just sketched, basically.
Yeah, I realize we're running out of time fast, so I'll just shoot you some quick questions. When the American Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences faced criticism about representation at the Oscars, they looked at their voting population and were like, ooh, and went out and started to change that. Can you do something about the voting membership of the European Film Academy?
Yeah, we are on that. Obviously, we need, first of all, more members. Europe has a big population compared to US in that sense, and we are just 4,000 members right now. So, but we need also more diverse members. So there's still a colleague now is dealing with community outreach. So we have since summer actually completely, including me, new positions hired to kind of also tackle and basically go with the change in the industry. And so we need more diverse members, but also I think that's important that we have a balance, because Western Europe is dominating right now, also our membership. And I think we need also to cover Eastern Europe, Southeast Europe more, and also making and also actually making people aware what we do, but also that they can be part of that community and be an active member. I think that's also important, that you watch the movies and then also be able to basically have an impact on the nominations.
I love to assign homework, so now you all get homework. One is go and check it out, the membership criteria on the European Film Academy website. You might be eligible to join, and it's pretty cool, obviously, to get to vote on these awards as well. So see if you should join, and ask your friends of different backgrounds and your co-production friends in other countries to join as well. All right, we have time for a very quick question, which is a giant question, so we'll see what you can do with it. I realized, preparing for this question, that I was kind of taking for granted that this problem is going to solve itself. Like, young people are much more chill about diversity, and they also demand diversity in a way that is not chill, so in time this is going to fix itself. Is this a demographic inevitability, or how much do we actually have to do the work?
I would not say it's solving itself, because obviously the young voices should be heard, and I think they have a very strong impact on this. But if people who are already still in the industry, and I'm talking here also, we will have people later on the panel from film funding, institution trainings, industry and film schools. And I think if they basically also give the chance for the young people not to only enter, but also kind of mentor them, because you can basically really be in this industry very quick, and then you can also be very easy out when you're not basically nurtured and basically kind of mentored by people who are experienced, but still also open to the new discussions. I think this is very important.
So we're not off the hook. Thank you ever so much, Fatih.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And with that, it's time to introduce our esteemed panel. Please welcome Tamara, Tatishvili, Neil Peplow, and Mette Damgaard Sørensen. And actually, Neil is joining us online, and I don't know if that's possible. Please come in and join us. There we are. Let's see if I can see Neil. There we are. I'll angle my chair so that I can see you. Hi, Neil. Please take a seat. So, our hypothesis for this session is that artistic sustainability and social sustainability cannot be separated. We can't find or attract or retain new and diverse talent if our work environments are not healthy, and we also won't be financially viable or relevant if we don't have the diverse talent. So from your experience, all of you working with unestablished talent, what would they need to be different today? Neil, let's start with you so we know if we can hear you.
Yes, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. And sorry that you've got such a big frame to look at. It's
I
still
should
early
also
in the...
say, Neil, that you're the CEO of the London Film School, previously, of course,
yeah.
at the BFI. Yes, go right ahead.
So I started on Monday, so don't ask me any detailed questions yet about everything to do with the London Film School. But it was quite an interesting question that you posed up front about what would ideal look like. And I think you really do have to go back to primary school. And that's the depth of commitment I think we need to be able to really shift the dial significantly. So University College London did a survey where they interviewed 13,000 children between the ages of 7 and 11. And actually what they found was 36% of children from as young as 7 base the careers that they want to go into on the people that they know, which seems obvious. But what was surprising was that 45% stated that film, television and radio was their biggest influence in terms of the career that they wanted to go into. Depressingly, what they also found out was that gender stereotypes defined the types of career expectation that that child had from the age of 7. So 34% of boys wanted to be sportsmen, 20% of girls wanted to be teachers, and it was this lack of access to role models that children could actually base their career aspirations on from that early stage of their formation that actually we need to start to consider now. So I think if we had a commitment from government, from education and from industry to establish very early on these clear signals that actually these careers are open to you and that you can be included into the film and television industry, which is actually helping shape the careers that you want to go into, I think that would be the perfect kind of focus for our later ambition.
I love that. Okay, so we start that early, like with the children. Yeah. Let's. In that case, I will move directly to Mette, who catches them around the first feature. Mette Damgaard is artistic director of New Danish Screen at the Danish Film Institute. What do you think needs to be different from today?
I think basically what we really need to think about is that whether doing feature films, if we think that's important, whether that's actually attractive for a new generation. I think because as Neil, obviously we need to start early on, but I think the people that we're working with basically come with skills that is quite new because they already did films when they were like quite young with their iPhones and stuff, so they are basically grown up in doing visual communication. But I think what we need to do is we need to basically emphasize that that filmmaking is not necessarily very highly competitive. It's not necessarily very stressful, as you know. That's pretty much the rumor that we are working with stars. We're working with directors, being basically the god, the one that you look at. But try and find methods and basically help creating a framework for methods where you work much more cooperative and where you frame your development in projects you actually do have time. I think time is essential, and you do have a project that is basically possible to do within the economy instead of just pushing it through.
When the younger filmmakers or unestablished filmmakers that you're working with, when they are controlling their own projects, do they tend to set them up in a more sensible way, or do they fall into the same traps as we've always done?
I think there are 2 ways. I definitely see quite a few now working with basically, Bibles for a healthy environment, and that they bring onto production, which is all about making sure that everyone, the communication is open, that everyone is actually quite aware of, basically how people are doing, and to avoid stress. And then there are others that tend to have basically 2 big ideas, which in my experience, is the thing that causes stress.
The creative ideas are too big.
Yeah, creative ideas. And that's, I think, where we come in and, like, insist on shaping and conceptualizing the projects. Because one of the things I was thinking about, actually, is during these days, is that we're always talking about how the budgets are rising and how, everything becomes much more expensive. And I think one thing that I didn't hear at all these days is, like, so let's look at the projects and see, how could we actually make them fit an economy instead of just asking more money or trying to push them through. So I think that's a key thing to learn.
Yes, we have so many thoughts. But let's get Tamara into the conversation. Tamara Tatishvili is MEDICI head of training focal. So you're of course now, that program is training funders. But you also have a deep industry background, so you can answer with any hat you'd like. What do you think that the unestablished talent needs to change?
I don't think that it's actually, thank you for having me. Unestablished talent does not necessarily have to change. I think that we need to look into the change on a 360 level, because we are talking about an ever-progressing industry, and actually that is good, because someone in the beginning mentioned if we are in this ideal world when everything is sustainable and the creativity is booming, and I'm not necessarily a believer in that, because the moment we say we have achieved something and the old schemes are working, I think that is where we're not discovering new talent anymore. If I put MEDICI role aside, and it was, I think, 13 years ago already, I was heading Georgia National Film Center, so a small country in Caucasus outside the European Union, and the budget of my fund was €1 million, so total budget, including production, distribution, and everything that is linked to the operations. And not because that there is something special in me or the team that it was there, we had a reality. Either we would have to go forward of a message bringing new talent on an international territory with a very creative ways, because financially we would never be sustainable, or we would have something that many post-Soviet territories still struggle with, such as, always glorifying the past that we are coming from and not allowing the young talent to come in. So the bet back then was actually on a raw, undiscovered talent, and I was operating in a territory where you were always having this cloud of existing Soviet Georgian filmmakers that were expected to be constantly making movies without allowing the young talent to get in. And the first and the second features, which we financed, so it makes 10, 11 years ago now, are the ones that later on, by some esteemed colleagues, were kind of branded or labeled as a new generation of Georgian filmmakers. What did they talk about? They put themselves on screen. So they were walking out of this expected with a very low budgets, actually, and they were making audiences come back to the screen because they could see themselves there. And I think that that is not necessarily always linked to the color of the skin, because everything that Fatih's been talking about, it has to be transversally present. It's not that I've brought like 1 kilo of change now here in the back that is only going to work for the management, or on that project we're going to be diverse and innovative on another project. And some people that I see the most important in this, that in this facilitation are actually the leaders in the national agencies. I think that talent is not only the creative talent, and now I put back my MEDICI hat, I do see that there should be a constant talent discovery and access to the leadership positions in fundings as well. Yeah. Because what Meta is discovering, and it so happens that we had a case study of the new Danish screen in MEDICI last year, this is a very proactive approach, and it could be translated in a smaller territory, actually. So it's not only a Nordic excellence, but something that could sell.
Yes, I realize you touched on something here that is a little bit of a taboo, that I think we all kind of emotionally are aware of this, and funders are grappling with it on a daily basis, but it still feels forbidden to say it. So I'm just going to try and say it. Is there, or ask you at least, is there a kind of tension between the established filmmakers? Is that one of the things that we are afraid of? That if we try and embrace the new voices, the established filmmakers, who might, like those Soviet Georgian filmmakers, be incredibly skilled craftspeople, incredibly important artists, that they're going to have less funding. Is this the case? Neil, is there a conflict between the established talent and the new voices?
Yeah, but there shouldn't be. I don't think there should be a conflict. I think if it's about clearly labelling what the funding is intended to do, then both can actually coexist. And I think there's actually ways of bringing through new talent by potentially shadowing that more established group that has been funded in the past. So I don't think that there should be that necessarily a kind of conflict between either we do this or we do that. I think it's what Tamara says, which is how are you constantly going out and discovering and finding that new talent so that you're not getting used to those pathways that have been created previously. And I think that is something which requires constant pushing. And it is also about putting in place, like I said, a widely established program which starts to tell children at an early stage of their development, you can tell your story on the big screen, you can tell your story on TV, and these are the ways where you can find that voice or find that career. But yeah, for me, I think that tension that you mentioned can actually be addressed by the way that those funds are structured.
Great. Mette, what do you think about that?
I pretty much agree with Neil, but I also think, there is, happily we're living in times where there is a lot of things done, so there's a lot of work, basically. But of course, when it comes to the number of national funded feature films, there is a certain amount. And if we push for new talent, or if we push for women, or if we push for, working class, whatever, then obviously we need to be just, basically embrace that, yes, the average director, which used to be male, middle class, white, will do fewer films. And I think but I think it has to be like that, basically, because we need those voices.
Well, I'll be direct, saying that I think that it depends. I think we're kind of getting into discussing a relativity of geography here, and I think that it really depends from which context you're looking into that. Yes, I think there was and there still is a tension, for instance, in the southeastern, Eastern European, you name it. It's another panel conversation how you put the geography of those countries. But it's also because of the past where you're coming from. If you are linked, if your mind is operating in a context which is a planned economy and has absolutely nothing to do with going out entrepreneurship, which finally we like to say that, audiovisual is so different, we're all so great, but finally it's a sector and it has a rule. It needs leadership, it needs management, it needs all the things that other sectors also do. Yes, in Georgia, for instance, but it relates to many other countries, there was this moment when funding a young talent, female or not, was taken a bit difficult by the established filmmakers. And there was also the other group when, for instance, also quite some years ago, we had a focus on, I think it was back then called South Caucasian talent in Locarno Film Festival, and a lot of those first and second filmmakers were going on stage. There was another filmmaker who was standing there, Otario Celiani, many people will here know, who is taught as a European filmmaker in many schools. He was standing there and crying. So you have both of them, and this is how you relate to geography, this is how you relate to the political context. And I'm a big believer that cinema, even though it can be a business, it has to be sustainable. It also is an identity marker to many nations. And what happens now in Ukraine, what happens now in Iran, that is a mean of communication. It's not only a product that we bring to the audiences, we also help people reflect or understand. And we should not actually forget that very strong power that cinema still has.
Yes, and I think, yes, that there is also something here. You were talking before about conceptualizing the projects to fit the budgets. And somehow we always take for granted that we shouldn't train the new people on theatrical features. That doesn't make sense. So they should do work in other formats and other media until they're ready to take that leap into theatrical features. But the total number of theatrical features released theatrically is probably going to be smaller. We talk very little about how the established filmmakers should also be working on these other Maybe they should go work on YouTube for a while. That could be super interesting, actually, for them to be in direct contact with the audience and see what happens then. Neil?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because when I was at the Australian Film, TV, Radio School, actually the students went out and they used YouTube or they used TikTok to start developing ideas. And I think this thought that you just put out there that maybe we should be discouraging them from making feature films is not where that new talent wants to go. So the most interesting kind of projects that we saw were the feature films that were developed and produced by the master's students. And one of them, which was a queer filmmaker who produced this feature film about coming of age with a very, very low budget, but a very kind of clear definition of what audience they were trying to reach. That film went really well across festivals and also got sold to Netflix. So that person went out without permission from a commissioning editor, made a film about an audience that he knew very well and had a huge success from it. So I think there is this understanding that actually the people that we're trying to bring into our industry are doing it anyway. They're creating TikTok series that are getting 1 million views per ep, and then developing that into a longer form and using TikTok as a way of developing a sense of what that project should be. And also what the exciting thing is about that, because they don't have to wait for permission, they are actually creating content which reflects who they are. And it goes to that point that Tamara's made about that sense of identity. And sometimes, film funds can move slowly, whilst the actual filmmakers are moving faster towards what a possible business model might look like.
And I realize you're also giving me an answer to that tension that also exists, which is that if you're reaching new audiences, that's new money, basically. That's new eyeballs, and that is not a conflict of interest and financially. There was an interesting success story. Mette, do you have a success story that you'd like to share?
I do, actually. I think one of our projects, the one that's called The Great Silence, that actually went to San Sebastian and was very interesting and really achieved their artistic goal. That project was actually one of the ones with the Project Bible. They have a very fragile director who basically from film school created a team around her and ways of working to make her able to do films and unfold her talent. And at the same time, that whole project, that's pretty much told in a convict. That whole project in their developing phase was a project that really went around, tried to find out what's the core of the story, what do we really want to tell, what's the important thing here, and then actually being able to make it on a very, very small budget, very fresh. Also, I think one of the things with that project, and I think in general in the way that we're working, as Neil addressed, is try to avoid, the stop-start thing of film funds, where you apply and then you're assessed and then you get a little grant and then you're assessed again. And try to speed that process up by simply saying yes very early on and pretty much have, trust in the talent very early so they know that their films will be made. I think that's again a key thing if you want to attract new talent, because that's attractive to them. And I think that's what really makes that kind of trust and trustworthy dialogue is what really makes them blossom.
Without knowing the project or the people involved, I think it's very interesting what you're saying about the director who, as you said, was the fragile person, so essentially has some kind of accessibility needs. Often when we think about accessibility for different kinds of fragilities or challenges in the industry, we mean, should it be possible for, like, I don't know, like a person in a wheelchair or a person who is neurodivergent to work as an assistant? But actually, if the person at the center has some kind of framework, maybe they're a parent, or maybe they have a disability, or maybe there's something else going on, if they build something that works for them, then it's going to work for everybody. And that's a way of approaching, of centering the sort of quote-unquote special situation. It can be an incredibly fast and radical way to achieve change.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes the talent, like in this case, really writer-director in Europe, let's say, do need that change as well, like going outside of the rules. Last week in Bozar in Brussels, I was hosting a Q&A session with a Bosnian filmmaker, Aida Begic, who is one of those first filmmakers who also kind of brought that country on a wider international map with her films. And she said, with my recent film, Balada, I just had to go back to 0 budget, in brackets, of course, production, just go out, forget all that rules, not because I'm now, of course, a bit more known, we know how to set a co-production structure in place, but we needed this moment of a creativity to be a small crew out there doing things our way. So it's also, this change needs to be looked at from different perspectives. What I think is important is the real change probably happens not with changing an attitude, but rather a behavior. And if this behavior changes on all levels, then you are supporting a creativity. And whether this is an emerging creative or an established talent opening up a whole new line, I think funders would be happy anyway, right? So you can reach out to diverse talent in that case.
I think there's something interesting here about this idea that what would work for me, like what would make my work better, is very much easier to get invested in. And then if it also makes everybody else's work better, that's a win. It doesn't feel like a cost.
And sometimes it's not a cost. I just referred, because you're also presenting this panel with people from Shadow Film. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, I had a collaboration with them when we had this spotlight on emerging talent. And before we started talking about that with Alexander, I met a filmmaker, young woman from Syria, who said, "Oh, I thought like Cannes, you're never gonna have any visibility. It's like really complicated to get there." And a couple of months later, I found her phone and we invited her to be spotlighted in this event. And for her, it was really one of those moments that unfolds on this empowerment stage, which is actually not necessarily budgeted. Of course, there you also need to then sustain it, but sometimes a small action has a strong meaning, and it's not only, as you said, like spread of the budget on a spreadsheet.
Time is going so fast, but I'm going to try and get a couple more questions in. You all have really deep insight into the Film Institute world. What would you want them to do more of or less of? Neil, let's start with you.
It's difficult to know where to begin, really, with that one. I think, for me, it's actually putting in place frameworks and established frameworks which bring in the diverse talent rather than initiatives, because actually you can have a particular focus on one aspect, and there was one film fund that I was working closely with that went for gender parity, and what they did was they invested a lot of money into the development of projects with female filmmakers, but what they didn't do is think about the pipeline further down in terms of converting those into production. And for them, it was almost like tick box. Okay, let's move on. And I think what's really important is putting in place sustainable long-term frameworks so that those pathways for diverse talent don't need to be reinvented every year. We actually at the film school in Australia, we did develop a framework. It's available online. It's called Inclusive Pathways Framework for Diversity and Inclusion. And it clearly sets out what that could look like from an individual practitioner perspective, so on a production, from a film fund perspective, but then also from a kind of wider global perspective in terms of government policy. And I think that's what's really important, is that theoretically we sit and we talk on panels about what should happen, what is actually going to be put in place long term, which will have that lasting impact. And that does take thought, and that does take a lot of work in terms of leadership and change of culture. But ultimately, I think that's going to have a much longer term benefit and return on investment.
Mette?
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's about long-term structures. I think what initiatives do is pretty much that they send a signal, and I think that's actually the main thing. Because to me, it's very much about, I think there's a whole group of talents who, when they look at the National Film Institutes or film funds, they don't see the door for them, basically. They don't think that the fund is for them. And by doing initiatives, you pretty much tell them, okay, so here's a door. And in my experience, that door remains afterwards. I also think that what initiatives do is, for a funder, is that it kind of gives us the courage to actually go with people that we wouldn't normally go with. Because, in that sense, obviously the competition is high. So in that framework, you allow yourself to, take some chances that you normally wouldn't do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's extremely important. So I think the signaling thing is extremely important, and I think the communication thing, because I think to me, one of the things that me as well in Denmark has been like thinking, you know, we're a welfare society. You know, everyone has the school, we have free education, whatever. So obviously, you know, that whole representation thing will probably solve itself in a way, because you know you're allowed to apply, you're allowed to go to film school if you want. And I think what we can see is it won't. That we have to be much more proactive. But to me, it's very much about communicating, and it's about being, you know, really curious about a new generation. Because I mean, let's face it, in my scheme, like working with new talents, we're all white female, you know. In menopause, you know, that's what they meet when they come in to mama, and you know, I constantly think, you know, whether that's the best fit for them. But I think what we need to do is actually we really need to be curious about their generation and their views, and trying to find out. So, you know, their stories and their projects, what's actually important to them, where the conflicts, that sort of thing.
This is so important, this idea that the structures will take care of it, and that we live in a meritocratic society, of course it will work, we think, and then we don't. So if you think, obviously anyone can apply, but you are thinking that from a position of like an academic white middle class person who lives in a university, in a city with a university, maybe you can just like find a relative who lives in a village in the country and is otherwise similar to you, and they cannot imagine that they would have this career or go looking for. So it's we need to get better in our imagination as well of like what other people's perspectives can be. What would you say, Tamara?
Well, I feel almost home here for MEDICI program because it's co-presented by Filmivast, Danish Film Institute and a Norwegian Film Institute. So it's, well, my view of that would be that I think these are exciting times to be a public funder because you are recalibrating on so many levels. And in a way, I think that senior financiers are producing the big picture from that very perspective and signal, communication, empowerment, and then, of course, the real funding mechanisms. If they are in reshaping, that's a good signal. I can only say that MEDICI is open to all funders, and from what I have observed in my 2 editions is that everyone is really curious to learn and to get inspired. And I'm not a believer that everyone necessarily needs to work together. I think that's a bit of a pressure that we put on each other sometimes, but knowing how others operate, get inspired, and then finding a meaningful ways of opening up to new collaborations, that can happen. I've seen this happening, and I think that it's on the right way of the reflection.
We're so out of time, and I'm going to do like a final round. Based on your experience, what's one thing you would recommend people to do? Neil, you go first. Just briefly.
Who am I recommending this to?
You
recommend
can
it to funds or to individual people who want to get into the industry?
Well, maybe the latter. Let's say you're speaking to people who want to get into the industry.
Okay, don't wait for permission. There are so many opportunities now to start to test and create the projects that you want the audiences to see, and there's also a lot of information and knowledge out there about how you can do that via YouTube, via websites, via just go out and make things.
Go out and make things. Yes.
And you know the audience better than commissioning editors most likely, and tell those stories. And I've seen people develop.
I'm sorry, we're out of time.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Tamara. Who are you speaking to, and what would you advise them to do?
Oh, I think a lot before I recommend anything to my 2 children. So I would just say courage, creativity, willpower. That will drive any initiative from whichever perspective.
Great. Mette, what about you? Final words?
I think it would be to the funders, basically saying, you know, that in a world that changes rapidly and for the good, I think we need to be very aware that structures are not stiff, that we should be very flexible and be very, I think we need to have structures that can change very fast and be adaptable to the talent and the new voices, not the other way around.
That's wonderful. Please give a big hand to Tamara Tatishvili, Neil Peplow, and Mette Damgaard Sørensen. Thank you very much. Thanks. Yes, so to cap off this session for a few final minutes, I would like to invite some friends from the Marché du Film onto the stage. Please welcome Guillaume Esmiol, Executive Director, and Alexandra Zakharchenko, Head of Programs and Training. So, welcome. What are some first reactions to what you've heard today?
Yeah, so I have two things that came up to my mind. First one was this fighting between generations of established filmmakers and the young filmmakers. So I'm not sure to understand why there is a competition, because it's definitely have to be a mentoring. And when we say mentoring, we suppose that the elder and established generation will nourish the new talents, but it's also the other way. So the young talents are so much to teach the established generation. So this collaboration and mentoring and supporting of each other, for me it's essential. And then the other thing that we rarely speak when we talk about the diversity and inclusion, we rarely speak about the social and economic level of people, of the filmmakers actually, on the people from the industry who are working in the film industry. So Neil was saying that there is this new generation who has an access to TikTok and creating the new content, but there are actually so many people who don't have this luxury to do so. So there is a question, who has this power to influence, to create this new content? And this where the film funds, for me, is essential, because their role is specifically to help those people. And of course, I'm also talking about big institutions, that this is essential for those people who don't have this luxury to create, because you need to have time, and you need to have a mental space, even not to think in how do you survive, but also create a new content.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting. I think it's Neil who explained that they made a survey, and to see the impact of contents on the younger generation, how it is important. When they made this survey, they discovered that I think almost half of them had strong stereotypes. So when you think of that, you realize that when you make a movie, you have an important part to play to try to reduce this kind of stereotypes. And how to do that, I think that the panels was quite clear that we need to support the young generation of talents. It's probably the best who knows how to speak to the young generation. And the question of fundings, of course, is a key.
I mean, and as I said at the beginning, I love to assign homework. If all of us are working with film, we should go find some 6-year-olds and talk to them about our job. I mean, that's also a very practical way to make them able to imagine what to do. You were talking about the difficulty with changing big institutions. The Cannes Film Festival, of course, is an old institution, and we know in some ways it's slow to change. The Marché, though, is closer to the immediate concerns of the industry. And now you have launched something called the impACT program. Can you talk a little bit about what that is, Guillaume?
Yeah. Let me defend the festival first. It's true, it's an old and prestigious festival, of course, but they are doing a lot of efforts, and we are part of the festival, of course. So in 2021, they launched a very ambitious sustainability plan that was announced this year, but it's going on every year, and it's more and more important. And they make some actions towards the young generations too. But to speak about the Marché du Film, it's true that we didn't want to work only on our own impact, but we, as the biggest film market, we think that we have a role to play, to have an impact on the whole industry, to help professionals to understand those topics of diversity, inclusion, and sustainability in general. And that's what we wanted to do with Alexandra when we have launched in 2021 the impACT, I say program. It's more initiative because it's transversal to all of our programs. We want those topics to be everywhere. We have a lot of programs in Cannes, I don't know how many. So it's not a program on the side, but it's something that should
it's like a filter almost. It's affecting the way you're looking at all of your programs.
Exactly. So when we have a program about documentaries or about VR or about innovation, or when we should be able to have those topics a bit everywhere. And that's what we've launched. So it's once again, it's gathering all the topics about sustainability, diversity, and inclusion. And we don't want to be in a position to give any lesson to anyone. We are not the expert. We are more a platform that is welcoming the experts who are sharing their visions, explaining what they do, organizations that are explaining their initiatives that may inspire others, and also to put the debates on some sensitive topics sometimes. So that's the role of the impACT initiative.
As we're running out of time, is there any specific thing you can say that we might experience at the Marché this year that is there because of this?
Yeah. So of course it's only beginning of February, so it's work in progress. But we launched last year the impACT Lab, which is also one of the actions that we take. So this is basically a program for emerging producers, supported by a National Film Fund. But this year we decided also to support by Marché du Film, two filmmakers that don't have the funding system in place, to help them to participate in this program. So basically it's 5 workshops that are happening online and on site in Cannes, and this producer, they also have access to all the programs that we have, and there is again this mentoring system where the experienced producer is helping for the new generations to get on board and to understand how Cannes works, which is a very hard place to navigate into.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we will have several debates and panels, but again, we will include in every program that we do the action that is impACT, which is more like a transition and a filter, as you say, that we have to look at the industry from.
Yes, we're out of time, I realize, but say the last word.
No, yes. But including we're going to have an important session with Nostradamus also.
Oh yes, of course, we're releasing the Nostradamus report very, very importantly. And inclusively, I feel, since the reason it's late is the maternity leave. So that's excellent, yes. Thank you so much, Alexandra and Guillaume. We will see you in Cannes, of course, and all of you at the Nostradamus session there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.